Hello and welcome to another episode of The Defenders on Sansad TV. And in this episode, we are looking at a subject which has repeatedly been highlighted by our authorities and even by the Honorable Prime Minister and the Honorable Raksha Mantri about the need for India to export its defense equipment and manufactured products more and more so that India in the next few years could become a reckonable country to provide exports to the global defense industry and the market. Currently, India exports about 13,000 crores worth of defense products, but very soon we could be hitting a figure of 40,000 crores. How that can be achieved, where are the support systems that exist and where are the limitations? To understand that, we have two extremely well-informed individuals who are deep inside the thinking of the strategic leadership of very big companies. We have with us Lieutenant General Arun Sahni, former GOC in Sea Southwestern Command, and as a top-notch military officer, he was a good choice by the Tata Group to come in as their strategic advisor. And we have with us Colonel Bhatia, better known as Mr. Bhatia, who is right now the president and CEO of a company that is repeatedly making news, and that is Bharat Forge Limited. So, Colonel Bhatia, sir, I can't resist but use your army rank because like you, even I don't use it otherwise, but you are my senior, so I have to give you respect.
Thank you so much.
And please explain to me what steps the government has initiated to encourage defense production and defense exports. Because one of the problems that I believe comes up is that as a producer and an exporter, you should be having a good captive market in India itself, which becomes your selling card to other countries that India's armed forces are buying it. And since Bharat Forge has been making news by making top-of-the-line artillery systems, I've had the privilege of visiting your factories and seeing them. Your stuff is world-class. You have come a long way from where you started off. So what was the vision that was driving you? What are your strengths? What are you looking for now in terms of support and encouragement from the government?
Thank you, Maroof. Firstly, let me get back to the point, why exports? You know, defense technology will always remain an instrument of foreign policy. If you want to occupy a rightful place in the Committee of Nations, you cannot afford to be an importer of security, what we were till about, and we still are to a certain extent, by having large-scale imports of weapon platforms from outside the country. So the vision of the government and vision of our Honorable Prime Minister was that we should become a net exporter in a reasonable amount of time. Our imports have come down from $7 billion to $5 billion last time, and our exports have actually shot up from $0.3 billion just 5 years ago to almost $1.7 billion as of last year. The second reason for this is that we are all looking at having a very strong defense industrial base in the country. Today, the total defense manufacturing in the country is around 86,000 crores, or roughly you can call it about $11 billion. We have set a stated aim of taking it up to $25 billion, which you also mentioned that we are. How are we going to reach there? Our budget only increases by 7 to 9% year on year.
Yeah.
So to fill that gap, exports is the only thing which can help us to grow from today's $11 billion to the $25 billion in the next 4 to 5 years.
Okay, so that's very comprehensively put together as an introduction. Now, General Sahni, sir, having been an army commander and commanding one of our strategic commands, which looks at a wide spectrum of equipment, you know, from air-land battlefield scenarios to tanks, amphibious crossings, and you being a gunner of repute yourself, one of the things that I noticed that the government has laid out strategic guidelines in which light tanks, helicopters, unarmed aerial vehicles, etc., needed to be indigenously produced. Now, if they are to be produced indigenously, I remember speaking to a former army chief and him telling me that we end up going in for these purchases when we reach a critical stage of deficiency. So if they are to be indigenously produced, everything has a cycle, everything has a timeline, 5, 10, 15 years, and you're going into the critical stages again and again. So how do you make up that gap of meeting your requirement with top of the line equipment, because the enemy will not wait for you to be fully armed and then he will attack you.
Absolutely.
He will attack you at your most vulnerable. History has shown us that. After 62, Pakistan tried to do that in 65. So therefore, what do you feel? Is the policy of the government acceptable to you and the group that you advise? Or are you waiting for the armed forces to make up some of their deficiencies till you can produce the items required? Because you need to provide it here to be able to sell it to others, to say the Indian armed forces are using it.
No, firstly, thank you, Maroof. Delighted to be on your show once again. And great to have Colonel Rajinder Bhatia sitting here, the expert who's been, the man in uniform who's been dealing with this kind of activity for quite some time. Coming back to the question, I think two things, I would say a few steps that have happened in the country in the last about a decade plus. There was this, I think the most important thing was the political resolve to ensure that India becomes self-sufficient in all spheres of critical activities. And I think nothing better than the COVID pandemic, which brought to light that disruptions in the supply chains, changing global order is going to make you depend, finally, as when they say, when the chips are down, it's only you who's going to be facing the music. And I think the policies have worked out well. The resoluteness of the Prime Minister in taking the step of putting out these positive lists, which I think has been done with a great amount of thinking and thought. And there is a timeline given that so-and-so, post so-and-so will be the period. I think they've taken into consideration that the time period or the gestation period for the private and homegrown industry to be able to meet those challenges and develop that equipment. That was the first thing that's happened. The second thing that has happened, which has been, I think the army was the biggest culprit of the whole lot, has become more open and interactive with the industry of what it wants, and has started getting involved at different stages. And maybe I think this Make in India defense has helped also. A lot of people like us who've come at the senior level can at least put the right direction to the industry. Which are the areas, what are the timelines that you need to look at if you really want to be competitive as far as the defense requirements and the users' requirements are meant. So I think these two things simultaneously have done the trick. But more importantly, I wanted to just see where were we and where did we come from, really speaking. When you look at it, we never manufactured platforms or major equipment, defense equipment. I think the only legacy that you always had was naval equipment. And maybe that's the reason when you look at these offshore patrol vessels or patrol boats and all the small ones, they were always in the pipeline given out more as G2G. And if you see, defense had become a purview of the OFB, the DRDO, and the DPSUs. So the private industry really found that there was no no major incentive to put in capital investment when the return on investments was really not, didn't work out right in the time frame that they had envisaged.
Okay.
This change has done the trick, I think, to an extent, that because you've now got clarity. Like just go by the current budget, 68% of the spending has to be with homegrown or indigenous industry. Now that's a great impetus here. So the private industry is designed to develop, has the business development acumen across the thing to be able to sell it for the country. And then I think the changes of the user and the point that I've been a defense attaché outside myself. Today the defense attachés are told to ensure that they promote Indian equipment and capabilities are flashed with the countries where they are, so that they know that India is also a country which can be utilized. So I think all these have helped us to be able to get to what stage we today are, that we are looking at homegrown ATAGs, which is within the country. You're looking at homegrown light tanks coming in, you're looking at armored fighting vehicles being made, other than, of course, the ancillary equipment like electro-optical devices, etc.
Right. I mean, you brought out the point about defense attaches. It was there in my notes that the government is also looking at providing financial support to defense attaches.
True.
To further the agenda of exports.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'll come back to you on another linked area. But Colonel Bhatia sir, I want you to explain to us how the American model of civil-military fusion has worked in our thinking, where the private sector has geared towards developing advanced intellectual property in association with the military and the military industrial complex. And your organization, I can see the smile on you, has been one of the leaders in that. So please explain.
Very valid question. You know, there was a time most of the technologies used to be developed in the defense domain. Then a time came that technologies were developed in the civil domain. And there was a process of transfusion of those technologies by process of, moving from one domain to another. So rightly, in fact, all this comes from that example of a book which probably we once discussed called Freedom Forge, where how during the Second World War, the defense industry came up in the United States of America on the back of civilian industry. It was the people from automotive background and people from shipping background who set up the largest corporation in the world. And the kind of equipment they produced was phenomenal. Coming much closer to home, when we started our journey on development of world-class artillery platforms, what was the background to this? Background to this was our metallurgical knowledge, a knowledge of metal forming, a knowledge of machining and manufacturing knowledge which we had developed as a part of a civilian domain. We started putting these technologies together, and as he had mentioned that we were not platform makers, but we could fuse all the technologies together and still become platform makers. You yourself saw it. We created 7 to 10 brand new platforms, all with intellectual property resting in the country.
Interesting. So General, I go back to you to ask a question that they've done, Bharat Forge in particular has done an exceptional job, and Tata is not far behind. In fact, in some of the products you have worked with Bharat Forge to make the guns for the country through DRDO, Tata's and Bharat Forge. Now, I want you to explain, there is an issue that comes up that the money that goes into R&D, as a thumb rule, I am told India, give or take a little, invests about 6% of our defense budget on R&D, whereas in countries like China, it is 12%. In the United States, is 20%. And 20% of their defense budget is a lot more than India's defense budget itself.
Absolutely.
So R&D is very important. How much R&D do you need to put in to have make in India products which the world will buy?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Yeah. I think percentages would be a notional figure to just go by. But I think the importance given by industry to R&D is the first step. I won't worry about, I'll come to the figure later, but I would say, I think the requirement to have integral design capability and fundamental first principle research has now dawned on the Indian industry, especially the private industry. Maybe Bharat Forge started earlier, Tata simultaneously. I mean, today when you look at this artillery gun, I must correct it, otherwise the Tatas will feel a little peeved about it. Both Tatas and Bharat Forge started together. In the supply chain linkages, Bharat Forge is an important linkage in the supply chain. And I think as it stands today, Tata is already in the process of procuring the similar equipment. So we would become independent totally as an OEM manufacturer another year down the line. So by the time these guns come out, I think we would be very much an OEM manufacturer, where I think smaller supply chain elements would come in from different people.
Right.
But more importantly, I think the question that you asked for R&D, I think today, once you have come into the market and you're producing platforms, it'll have to be competitive and the capabilities will have to be better, if not at least similar to what is available in the existing markets.
Right.
And the developed world is far ahead of us on that. So I think today when you're looking at a figure, I think anything between, in an escalatory continuum, we need to go to about a figure of 10%. But I think from where we stand at about 1 to 2.5%, I think we need to get to 5 to 6%, at least in the next 2 to 3 years. And I think the bigger corporates are looking at it, the big corporate houses, whether it's, I'm sure, L&T, Bharat Forge, Tatas or Mahindras, or tomorrow the Adanis who are coming in, I'm sure they're going to be looking at it, because otherwise you're not going to be competitive. The story, the Indian market is that much and all as far as the defense industry is concerned. If you're competing here and you've produced products which are world class, you really have the rest of the world available to you, because on prices, we will be able to match anything that is developed from the developed world.
That actually leads me to my next question.
So, but Maroof, if you permit me, I would like to just give my view on this percentage of R&D. Very simple one-liner. More important than the quantum or the percentage is the ecosystem we create for having that excitement in research and development in the country.
Absolutely.
I think, yeah.
I mean, you know, at the end of the day, the entire defense industrial complex needs a bigger and bigger ecosystem.
Absolutely.
You know, it's not just export, it's just not import, it's not assembly lines, it's everything. If India is to become the 6th biggest defense exporter, because, you know, the P5 is already big in this business.
I agree with you.
So we have to create more of an ecosystem. And I'm going to ask you, sir, 2 linked questions.
Sure.
One is the fact that you see defense items that are to be exported, they need not be big ticket items. They can also be boot and bayonet, which is something every army worth its name needs. And if you make quality boot and bayonet, and I remember one article I was reading when somebody said that many of our soldiers until recently were buying their boots from the outside the market,
Absolutely.
then going through ordnance supplies.
Absolutely.
Because they needed to last out those long kilometers of patrolling in the jungles and rough terrain.
100%.
But what I'm coming to you, sir, is this fact that your group, there were some 200 deals that were struck recently at Aero India. Your group, apparently by an admission by your representative, had got orders worth 2,000 crores from Aero India to export. I'm told you were waiting for an order for your ATACS gun from the army, but the news in the papers has just arrived that the army is now giving you the order for the ATACS guns. So, which is an exceptional product that you have made, better than anything in the world. Now, what is it that you would look as incentive to go to the next level of exports and production? Because even 2,000 crores is not a big enough order.
Not a big enough order. So, answering your question, firstly, we did make an announcement, to be precise, that we have received export orders to the tune of $250 million, which will be excess of 2,000 crores in the last passing couple of months. And we are also in the process of getting many more exports. We also have the good news that 307 8X guns have been approved for induction. And it looks like that a long, tedious journey which we started almost 7 years ago
7, 8 years.
is reaching a logical conclusion. But answer to your question, which was a very pertinent one, that you cannot depend upon one product or two products if you want to make a country as a exporter and bring it to, say, level of 6 in the hierarchy. For that, you need to cut across from high technology to mid technology to low technology product. Everything needs to be in that charter. There are people who should be exporting boots, like you rightly said. There should be people who should be exporting small arms. There should be weapon platforms. So everybody should be doing it. Coming back to what can the state do to help? I started by saying that defense transaction or technology will always remain an instrument of foreign policy.
Absolutely.
If it is an instrument of foreign policy, obviously it has to be driven by state in a much bigger way.
Yes.
Our state has changed tremendously. Just 3 months ago, we had a gun platform which was to be exported. We got full support from Indian Army. They gave us the ranges. MOD gave us the permission to take ammunition from army stocks. They provided all the help to take these exports or export these guns. This kind of work we need to do much more. Second part we need to formalize G to G sales. You know, government to government sales are the best way. You have seen how United States does it, how many countries do it. We also need to formalize. And the third fillip which can be given to exports is provision of line of credit and utilizing that line of credit for defense exports.
Very true. In fact, it's no secret. I've spoken to a lot of officers who've gone for some other training activity to the US, and the delegation that meets them there, he says, General, forget about the training. Let's see what are you willing to order because we want to sell. You know, that's what drives the Americans.
Yeah.
Now, General Sahni sir, I want you to understand, and here particularly your group comes in. It says that Tata and Airbus have plugged a missing piece of the puzzle by significantly boosting the Make in India program with how you have now gone in to create the first Make in India aerospace program, which is, I think, the C295.
C295.
That's right.
Now, it's a big step forward. What did you find allowed you to get into that space? Is it your company's background in aerospace? Because civilian aviation, you are pretty much in.
Yeah.
Or was it because you were identified by the government of India that you get into this partnership, you will get our support, as Colonel Bhatia was bringing out, and we want to quickly move into that space? What were your experiences?
See, I think when you look at Tata's when they got into defense, how did that start? I think the credit needs to go to Mr. Ramadrai, who was the first chairman of Tata Aerospace and Defense together. Because of him being with TCS and having chaired TCS and taken it through a long period of time to make it what it is, one of the best companies today in the world in competition with the other two partners, he managed to get into collaborative build-to-print kind of functionalities, JVs, with both Boeing, with the Airbus, with Lockheed Martin. You now also look with GE engines. So to give you an example, if this started about 12 years back, we make a portion of the Apache, which is manufactured here in Hyderabad under one of the JVs. We make the C-17, a portion of that is manufactured by Tata's. You also have thereafter certain amount of airframes of the Boeing and Airbus, which has manufactured here, part of their supply chain.
So you are in a variety of aerospace areas.
Yeah, so the aerostructures areas gave us that capability and confidence that if I'm making a portion of the engine, a portion of the hull, the complete Pilatus training aircraft, which is from Spain, is 100% fabricated by the Tatas. And I think it was a logical evolution that C295 should be given to us because you've developed this expertise across the complete spectrum of activities that the company does.
No, in fact, you've brought me to my concluding remark that despite the complaints that people in the industry and otherwise have that the private industry is not getting a level playing field, I think we have to grant it to the government and
100%.
to our mandarins in South Block that they do their homework before engaging with you.
Absolutely.
Because they know they wouldn't go to Bharat Forge for aerospace, but they would certainly go to Bharat Forge, as once Baba Kalyani ji told me that during the Kargil conflict they were making ammunition.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they were told, provided the orders will come to you ex post facto, but provide us that because the country needs it.
You are absolutely
and
right.
they were willing to provide that. Likewise, the country needs to gallop now in building and exporting and even absorbing at home. And companies like yours are the model that other companies must look at, that if they can do it, why can't we?
Sure.
Today, as you said, I think so rightly, it's 1800 to 2000 crores is the export orders on these build to print which we are. And now we have indigenized it, whereas those products of Tata's are the only ones which are picked up and circulated for the other supply chain manufacturers. So
True.
it's quite amazing.
So it's, on that happy note, I'll have to wind up because I'm told we are out of time. But thank you very much for your hands-on, brilliant insights. I'm sure those who are watching this show would have learned from where all the government is doing it right. And had we done this same thing 10 or 15 years ago, God knows where we would have been in the export hierarchy. Not number 6, maybe number 3. Just like our economy is moving that fast.
You're absolutely
but
right.
thanks very much, and thank you very much for your insights, and thanks for watching. Until our next episode, goodbye.